Hey guys, welcome to Just the Tip, episode 3. If you haven't noticed already, this is a very long video. So to make sure it's no longer than it has to be, let's get stuck into it. Now, good paint correction is it's important. It's a big, important step. It's the most time-consuming step of a detail. You want to kind of get through it as quickly as possible. There's huge savings to be had if you can step up your paint correction game and make it more efficient. You can make significant savings. If you're not a professional detailer and you're just looking to bump up the quality for yourself, or at least not take more than one weekend to do some serious paint correction, this is for you too. Alright, so as usual, we start with a wash. Wash, very important. Always wash the car, always do it properly. Never do paint correction after no washing or just a quick wipe down or something like that. Make sure you wash the car, and you may as well do all the gritty work, around badges, cleaning around badges. You may as well do all of that now. That usually, you dislodge little particles and things like that, or you have to, sometimes you're just stuck using, I try to avoid it as much as possible, but you're stuck using brushes to get around badges and things. Now's the time to do that because you're going to correct the paint anyway. So if you just happen with those brushes to maybe mar the paint a little, well, better to do it now. Don't do it after the paint correction, of course. Better to do it now, get those really, really clean, or if you want to remove them, if you've got the time, remove badges. It's always best to polish behind them and then put them back on. Just make sure the car is schmick. That's my point there. Next step is to decontaminate. Now, because decontamination is so important, I'm going to quickly go over it. You have to do that. This is the foundation of your paint correction. If you don't do it, you're going to set yourself up for much longer correction times. You're going to fill your pad full of unnecessary debris, and you're going to get friction as a result. You're going to create more holograms and things like that. Starting out with a much smoother surface that's clean, free of that contamination, gives you much better paint correction processes. So give yourself a really good foundation. Don't skip the decontamination step, and don't quickly rush through it. Really do a proper job of it. Now we want to use an eraser. You can either use a clay bar, which we don't recommend, or you can use an eraser. Both of these remove contaminants above the surface. Unfortunately, the clay bar pulls these contaminants up into itself. The eraser also does this, but it doesn't hold the contaminants. The eraser drops these contaminants back down into the slurry of lube. Then you wipe that slurry of lube away, and you start fresh every time. So when you go onto the next panel, that eraser is clean. It doesn't have those contaminants in it, and you're not reintroducing them to the surface. What the clay bar does is hold on to those contaminants, and then they push down into the surface, and you get some swirling as a result. A clay bar is much more destructive to the surface than an eraser is. Switch to the eraser, it's about the same price as a clay bar. It's significantly less destructive, and they have a much longer life. Another benefit of the eraser is if you happen to drop it on the ground, you can pick it up, wash it out, and you're good to go again. Okay, we got through that quickly. Very important step though. Don't ever skip decontamination. Don't rush through it either. Next is diagnostics. Diagnostics are important if you have the time in your budget to do it. So we want to make sure we get the budget right, but quoting is for another video. If you have the time, because it does take a lot of time, usually anywhere between 2 to 4 hours per vehicle, you need to have either an SSM, which most detailers don't, an ultrasound paint thickness tester, and a gloss meter. This one's very important. This one's far less important. This one's very expensive, so no one expects you to have them. They're about $20,000 now for the good ones, the proper ones. Same as a gloss meter, you can get a gloss meter for $100, but the good ones are about $500. And an ultrasound paint thickness tester. You can get a magnetic paint thickness tester, but it only works on steel, so you can't test carbon panels or Kevlar panels or composite panels, plastic panels, bumper bars and mirrors and things like that. Half the vehicle on most modern cars, so don't get a cheap magnetic one. It's kind of useless. You're testing half the car. If there's a spot that's going to catch you out, it's probably going to be on the plastics. Good ultrasound machines are anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000. Now we're from the world's best country, so we're always talking in Australian dollars. The benefit of paint thickness testing is that it gives you a much better understanding of how much paint you've got to work with. So you don't do the horribly just gut-wrenching thing of taking some paint off a customer's car. It's going to happen in nearly 25 years. It's happened twice to me, and both times it's not my fault, but it's just been horrible to ring the customer and say, this is the mistake I've had. And I go all out, so I pay for the job at the best panel shops, I wipe the price of the car for the customer, and I do everything else the customer asks for, even if they haven't asked for it. I just do heaps for them, products, everything, make them feel as good as possible. The car comes back to them better than it left. That's what I've done both times. Customers have been very happy. I'm still pissed off about it though. The unfortunate thing with paint thickness testing is, if you have a bonnet, for instance, and you're going to break it up into at least 9 sections, you're going to have to take at least 100 readings per section. You really do. Because if you take a reading here, and a reading here, there might be a spot here that's very low that you're going to buff through, and you still have to paint the whole panel if something goes wrong. So you really have to take a lot of readings. I mean, seriously, you have to break the bonnet into around 9 sections, and you have to take around 100 readings per section. This adds up. This is where that almost 4 hours of time in the diagnostics section of the detail goes to, and this is money. The customer has to pay an extra 4 hours for this. Most customers won't. And to be honest, we only do this to 25% of cars. It is just unviable to do this to every single car. You have to have the experience to understand. You get a good feeling for the car. This car's definitely, risky, so we're going to do this, or at least on the riskier panels, the riskier sections, or we're just not going to cut as hard. And if you're not going to cut as hard but you need to, why bother starting the job in the first place? Do it properly. You have to build that in. If the customer can't afford it, or you can't find a way to build that in, either take the risk, I wouldn't, either take the risk or don't do the job at all. When you do your paint thickness test, you break it up into however many sections you want to do, and you take all your readings. If you get a high reading, you actually want to flag that. If it's very high, something's wrong. Make sure your machine's calibrated, make sure you've bought a quality machine, make sure you don't drop it. It's a precision instrument. If you do drop it, it's out of whack. If you get a low reading, you want to flag that also, and make sure that you're doing less work in that area, or you're just at least aware of it. You'll be physically aware when you're polishing, and you won't polish as much. I tend to just avoid it completely. I either mask it off and do the paint correction over that masked area, and then rip the masking tape off and blend in, and be very careful as I'm going in. Okay, won't get too hung up on that. If you want an elaboration of anything in this video, please ask and we'll elaborate on any one of these steps. If I've just gone too quickly over it, let me know and I'll add more information. Gloss meter testing can be useful. It's mostly useful just so you know that you actually have increased gloss in that area. You want to use a gloss meter that sends a beam in at 20 degrees and attempts to catch it at 20 degrees. If the resulting beam comes back at 20 degrees, which it won't, you've got 100 gloss units. That's perfect gloss, which you're never ever going to achieve. It's always going to be, a new car will have 90-ish. If it's presented well and looked after well, have about 90. And with good paint correction method, you can get it up to 95. I think the most we've ever achieved is 95 or 96. Now, paintwork correction. So you've got your different level of scratches. They're different depths. These are your swirls, these are your heavy swirls, these are your light scratches, your heavy scratches, and these are either deeper marks that require very aggressive methods to remove, such as wet sanding, or they're not removable, they're down to undercoat. If your undercoat's here and it's gone down below the undercoat, forget it. It's worth correcting. You want to round off this edge and this edge so that it's not as noticeable. And as a result, you won't see it as much and it will look better and the customer will be happy. Before you want to do the job, and this takes a bit of experience, you want to understand how many of the imperfections are whichever imperfection they are, and how many there are per panel. And usually they're at least consistent. So the whole car will have this type and this type, or this type and this type, but they're consistent, generally consistent across the vehicle, unless there's a painted panel or something like that. Now we know that it takes just over 8 hours to remove swirls from a car properly and have a really nice 95 gloss unit finish. It takes 12 to 15 hours to remove heavy swirling and or light scratches, about 15 to 18 hours to remove light scratches, and about 30 to 40 hours to remove heavy scratches. This is what we'd call a stage 1 detail, and we used to call it, kind of still do, rejuvenation. This is what we'd call a stage 2 or intensive, and this is what we'd call a stage 3 or a transformation. Sorry, these are the detail services, and the paint correction is part of that and is most of that detail service. And when we say this, we mean all of this is 95 gloss unit resolver. That's what we're heading for, and usually we come pretty close to it. It's always between 92 and 95 gloss units. It doesn't matter how bad it started out with, it just matters how much time you're putting into it to achieve that finish. A new car can come up to 95 gloss units, a heavily used 20-year-old work ute can come up to 95 gloss units. It just needs more time. The reason for this discrepancy is car size and paint type. Okay, now polish choice. You have chemical polishers, abrasive polishers, of which there are generally cap technology and diminishing abrasive. And you've got your glazers. You've then got hybrids, which are a mixture of all three. Chemical polishers are completely useless in my opinion. They're not permanent, they clean the surface. I don't even think they should be called a polish, but they exist, they are called polishers, look out for them. Now glazes, and we do have one glaze, it's dark matter. Dark matter is a hybrid, it has some protection in it. Not all glazes have protection. It has some abrasives in it, they're the diminishing type. It has some cleaners in it. They're very, very, very light, very light. And it has what we call color charged glazes. Now dark matter does its job by cleaning the surface very, very lightly, and then some abrasives, if you're using dark matter with a machine, the abrasives will move around. They're very, very, very fine abrasive. They're what you'll find in our ultra fine jeweling compound. They're the diminishing type, so they haven't got much bite to them, but they're the type to gloss up a surface significantly. That's what they're there for. It adds some color charge glazes, so anything like that, red, anything that's a darker color, it will really give you that depth of color, that nice thick look to it and jelly look to it, and it has a little protection. Glazes, including dark matter, we would recommend only for show cars. They just don't have a lot of protection. Or we'd recommend them over a much more durable protection or higher performing protection. Now we get to the good stuff. In a bottle of polish, you have basically, I mean, it's more complex than this, but you basically have lubrication and you have your abrasives. And this is what you use on your panel. They're mixed together. You might have more abrasives than lube in some formulas, or the other way round. Sometimes the abrasives, like our compound, are clustered abrasives, sometimes they're diminishing. Now some manufacturers like to put a lot more lubrication than abrasives. Usually this is because abrasives are the more expensive component. They will then market this as having long working times. Long working times is marketing speak for we've put a lot of the cheaper lubricants in instead of putting the more expensive abrasives in. Long working times, some detailers unfortunately describe them as a positive characteristic. They say this has long working times, therefore it's a great characteristic that this polish has. Long working times for real professional detailers equate to longer polishing times, which is more expense. It's not good for your company, it's not good for your customer. You want fast working times. Fast working times means you have to have efficient and high concentration of abrasives with a very high quality lube. The less lube you got, the higher quality it has to be. It has to be able to sustain that high friction and not just simply flash off. Now, diminishing polishes, they can be this shape or this shape. Usually when I see them, they're this shape. The edges of the abrasive do the cutting and then they round off and they become spent after a certain amount of working time. Diminishing abrasives start cutting at whatever level they're cutting and they continue to cut at that level until they're finished. To help you better understand the way polishes work and abrasives work, think of them like sandpaper. They're similar in the sense, except that polish has the abrasives, which are much finer, suspended in liquid instead of glued to a sheet of paper. And instead of rubbing that paper along the surface, you're applying it to a buffing pad and agitating it. Diminishing abrasives are a lot like sandpaper in that sense. They have a grit level, P6000 equivalent or something like that, and they will cut and finish at that level and only that level. Now your cap polishes or clustered abrasive polish will have abrasives that are clustered in groups. They kind of huddle together. These act as one big abrasive, which can be anywhere between 2 to 5 times the size of your diminishing abrasives. They then break down into smaller particles, similar in size to the diminishing particles. So they don't behave like a sandpaper. They may start cutting at a P2000 grit level and finish up at a P4000 grit. Being able to cut at one level and refine down to another level is hugely efficient. The cost saving and the amount of extra correction you can do in any given time is significantly greater than the diminishing abrasive. This technology, in my opinion, is worth twice the price of the diminishing abrasive. I wouldn't even bother to use diminishing abrasive now that this technology exists. Also with your polishes, some abrasives are soft and some abrasives are hard. Hard abrasives are an issue when you have some dusting and you have some abrasives that have been ejected from the pad and they're sitting on top of the surface. If you've ever removed polish from soft paint and you've noticed that the cloth has marred it, you've grabbed another cloth and you've tried different cloths and you're sure that cloth is clean and soft and it keeps marring, or you've got that surface fine and you've wiped it and it looks fine, but then on another panel you've wiped it again and you start to see some marring, that could be, and most likely is, hard abrasives. And you want to switch to a polish with soft abrasives, especially if you're polishing soft paintwork. Another issue with usually cheap polishes is softening, chemical softening. When you remove those imperfections, they're only partially removed. It looks completely removed, but some of that is temporary. What's happening here is the chemical is softening the paint. The abrasives are doing much more cutting because the paint's much softer, and then there's some suck back. When you get that suck back, some of those imperfections come back, and it is the absolute most inefficient way to polish. It costs an absolute fortune. You have to go around the car, then come back and go around the car again. If you're using that same polish to go around the car again, you might even have to do it a third time. Now, pad choice. We will soon be offering an extended range of pads. We'll start at wool, which is new for us, foam, nanofiber or microfiber, and orange peel reduction, or OPR for short. Now each pad has its own characteristics and offers its own level of cut and finish. I've listed these three from the heaviest cutting to the finest, but you don't necessarily choose them for that one characteristic. There's a bunch of characteristics they have, and you'd make that choice based on the application. Whatever that paint type and the imperfections that are in that paint calls for, that's what you would choose. And you would choose a pad that works well with your polish. They have to work well together with your polish. We do a lot of testing to make sure our polishes are compatible with these material types. Now, there are pros and cons to each. The Pro to Wool is very fast cutting. The Con to Wool low gloss in general. Another pro is low temp levels in general. They clean very efficiently, they wash clean very quickly, and they dry very, very quickly. They can be dirty. They tend to drop fibers more than nanofiber, and foam, if you look after foam, is very, very clean. Some people, I haven't come across many, but I did come across two who have allergies and just allergic to wool, which is a bummer. We'll have wool pads soon, and they're exciting. The old school wool pads had fibers with little hooks on them, and just recently Australian Wool has come through with a technology where they deburr the hooks off it, so it's just nice clean fibre, and this is what's transformed a fibre that is completely useless for detailing and something we haven't used since the 90s and only on the cheapest cars, to something that we're absolutely going to use very, very soon, as we're finished with testing. Foam. Foam can give you some really good cutting power. It's also, the good quality foam is very uniform, and you can rely on it to give you a certain level of finish. Whilst foam doesn't cut as fast as wool, it still is quite fast and efficient. The downsides of foam are they're expensive. Good foam pads are expensive. They insulate very, very well, which isn't a good thing. They create a lot of heat. Companies have got around this by making a waffle design or cutting fancy patterns in them, and does absolutely nothing. These all squash down, it becomes flat, and if you don't squash them down, they don't become flat, and they get this airflow technique. All you're doing is getting less surface area, so you're not actually getting any of that the full potential of cutting power. You may as well just use a flat pad and use the whole pad and just don't buffer as long, or just choose something else. If you've got massive issues with heat on paint, you should be choosing a nanofiber, and in future you'll be able to choose possibly a wool pad for the heavy cutting step. The other issue with the insulation is they'll hold a lot of heat between the back of the foam pad and the backing plate. The adhesive on either the foam pad or the backing plate, or both, will sometimes fail because of that heat, and you'll get a pad flying off, or a backing plate that's delaminated. Nanofiber, we'll start with the cons. We can't get nanofiber that finishes up very well to cut that well. It has a good balance. It shouldn't really be a con. Nanofiber pads are better as a one-stepper or a finisher. They can cut very, very well, as most of our customers know. They use nanofiber pads. They do a great job of cutting. They just don't cut as well as the more aggressive foams, and they certainly don't cut as fast as wool. They also give you none of the side effects of these two. You get very, very, very high gloss from nanofiber, very high gloss. You have next to no heat issues. You can work a nanofiber pad full ball, a bit of pressure into it, and it's just a champion at dispersing heat. This makes the pads durable, and I find them, most people I talk to find them very, very clean. What orange peel reduction pads do is reduce the amount of peel, but it does it gradually. So instead of doing what sandpaper does, which is just to knock the tops off in a very blunt fashion where you just go straight down to a certain level, the orange peel reduction pads allow you to see and gradually reduce that peel. If your goal is for completely knocking out peel, go sanding paper, it's just much faster. If your goal is to match peel, perhaps a panel was painted and it's got more peel than another panel, and you want to match that peel and blend it in, you would use an OPR pad. What the OPR pad does is it just kind of knocks the tops off a little bit gradually. Then you can have a look at your peel, and you can start to take it off and start to taper and taper and taper until you get the amount of peel, and you still have peel, but the amount of peel that you want to match other panels. Or if you just simply wanted to reduce the peel a bit, but you still wanted some peel. Peel is not an issue or a side effect of bad painting or anything. Peel is dialed in by manufacturers, and peel looks nice and it suits certain shapes and colors and things. These finishes are subjective. You can have one or the other. You either like this or you like that, and there are pros and cons to each. Okay, machine choice. People spend forever talking about which machine they're going to use, and it is important, I get it. We agree it's important, and so important we're going to release a whole range of machines soon. Okay, rotary. This is still just my favourite. There's something about a rotary polisher that just still wins, and unfortunately it requires huge skill. I've said it before, but I'll mention it because it's really appropriate for this video. That's the rotary polisher. The rotary polisher, it unfortunately requires a lot of skill, but fortunately just gives you all the feedback. It teaches you to be a good detailer. It will give you the most amount of accessory options. It is the tool for a professional detailer, and if you're a professional detailer and don't own a rotary polisher, you must get one. You can own these too, they're good and they're getting better all the time, but you really do have to have a rotary polisher and learn to use it. It will make your jobs faster. Yes, it has more risk, but these are also risky, especially these big ones. A lot of people are using 21mm throw random orbits. They're actually quite risky. Not much less risky than a rotary polisher, and if you really learn to use a rotary polisher properly, it's as risky as a long throw random orbit. Get a rotary polisher. Rotary polishers are durable. They're simple machines. A simpler machine is just going to be more durable. They have more power. Now this translates to it being faster sometimes, but it also translates to a smoother rotation, which in turn yields a better finish. If the machine's not bogging down, or it's not catching, or it's just simply smoother, it's going to give you a nicer finish. They're usually lighter and more compact. The rotary polisher we're working on is much lighter and much more compact than a long throw, and it's going to last longer and it's going to be a little cheaper. Also, and this is a big one, finish quality. On some paints, and yes it is very few, but on some paints, in the Ferrari F40 that we do, at least once every 2 years, is a perfect example of this. It finishes up best. We get the most gloss, statistically we get the most gloss out of that paintwork when we use a rotary to finish. If we use any one of these type of machines, we get less gloss than with a rotary. We've tried every different pad type, every different pad and polish combination. If we use a rotary, we just simply get more gloss, we get a better finish. Now there's forced rotation. If I'm correct, forced rotation is a technology owned by Festool, and I think they allow Bosch to use it. I could be wrong, I'm not going to go too much into that. I definitely don't want to mislead people if that's not the case. Forced rotation is slightly different to the way a random orbit works. The machines we used to use were called Rotex. We no longer use our Festool Rotex anymore. They were great for a good 15-year period. We used nothing but Rotex for a specific type of work. They didn't get much use, but when they were called in for duty, they just had this bright niche that was something that only the force rotation machines could do, but they're no longer necessary, and I wouldn't recommend them for detailing use anymore. Quite expensive too. Great for sanding, no longer required for detailing in my opinion. Okay, now random orbit, which is what most enthusiasts are using, and most professional detailers have at least one. Everybody seems to think that the longer the throw, the better the machine is, but that's not the case. The longer the throw, the more risky the machine is. The longer the throw, the less detailed work you can do. If this is your backing plate, but it's going to come out to here, and that's, let's say, just use the longest throw that we have, 25mm, and you're polishing a rounded door handle with a rotary polisher, you're able, and this is one of the pros, I should have put it over here, one of the pros is that this line here, the top of the pad, is going to continue on, and you can get a very, very straight edge with a rotary polisher. And you can also do this type of work with an 8mm orbit machine like the Velvet Revolver. It's perfectly suited to this kind of work. You can get close enough, and the Velvet Revolver is clutched, and it's a very, very forgiving machine, so as long as you've masked this section, you're able to go right up to that door handle and buff along it. You cannot do that with a 25 or 21 or even an 18. mil machine, it just will smash into that door handle every time, and there's the risk of the backing plate hitting it, or as that pad moves up, it'll just dig into that the section, and you've got the edge of the foam, which is the unlubricated edge, rubbing against that door handle. It's just not the way to do a job. If you've only got one machine and it's a long throw machine, there's a lot of the car that you're not going to get done properly, and that's not detailing. Detailing is detailing all the little details. You have to get in all the little nooks and crannies, so you really need one of these first before you get one of these. If you want all of them, that's great if you've got the budget for all of them. If you want one of them, get the 8mm first. Don't go to the big throw machine and think, well, that'll do everything. Pros for the big boys for the really long throw is they're fast, got fast action. They can spin usually big pads and cover a large area very quickly, and they've got that really aggressive action that comes along with that big throw, so you really get a lot of cutting power very quickly. These are slightly risky, but they don't require the skill of a rotary, and you'll get much more gloss more easily than you will if you're a low-skilled rotary user. So if you've ever used a rotary machine and you say it just doesn't deliver a good finish, it's not the machine, it's your skill level. But that's fine. If your skill level's low, that might be the machine for you. Now, we've been using our 21 and 25mm machines over the last year and a bit, as much as we've used our 8mm machines. The 12, 15 and 18 don't get used very much at all, but they do come in really handily, especially the 15. The 15mm I just find has a certain type of finish and certain type of look to it. It's a very good one-stepper machine. The 15mm with a nanofiber pad, which we used on that car, just saved a bit of time. If you didn't have very deep imperfections, and it didn't have to be perfect, that section, you could hit that with the 15mm nanofiber pad and it would give you a very quick one-step action. Also, because it had a nanofiber pad and because it was only 15mm, which is 15mm is quite a bit of throw, but it's not huge. It was actually forgiving on the surface. There wasn't a lot of heat. There was just enough cutting power, just enough gloss. Really good one-step by the 15mm. And 12 and 18 are obviously either side of that, and you might find that you like those. 12 I like a slightly smaller pad on, maybe a 125mm pad, and around 15 to 18 I'm at 135 or 150mm, and 21 and 25 always 150mm pads with those. Hope that helps you understand machine types. Now, we'll probably come back and talk a little bit about the machines in separate videos for each machine type as our machine range is released. If you have any more questions though, don't hesitate to ask. If they're about the machines, please don't ask. We won't have any information until they're released. If you've got a rotary pad, and this is a trick that we used to do that we never told anybody, that actually gave us we think gave us an advantage, and we don't think many people knew about it. On our rotary pads, we used to offset the pad. So that's your backing plate, and we would offset our pad. You've essentially got a force rotation machine. It really does behave like a force rotation machine. You get the characteristics of an 8mm RO or even a 12mm RO, even with an 8mm offset, but you get that force rotation characteristic and the rotary characteristics. You wouldn't use this very often, but it does come in handy and it's very quick to do. You simply lift the pad off and put the pad on. We would mark the pads. We would get a 125mm backing plate and I would mark the back of the pad and measure it out 8mm so I knew where to offset it. It was only useful for certain situations, but gave me a hell of a lot more grunt. There was a lot of feedback in the machine, but for that section when and where I needed it, that was a beautiful trick that I was using for about 6 years. This, not all the time, but this on some sections can come in handy. I hope that trick's useful. Another machine choice, and we do use it not very often, but I'm not going to mention it here, is a drill. A conventional drill is so useful. You've got to have one. We use one with a clutching mechanism, and we attach polishing balls to it, and we do the inside of exhausts and a whole range of different things. They just sometimes get into places, or they're just the most suitable solution for that particular area of the car. Good to have. You've got to have one anyway. Use it for detailing with the appropriate tool for the right application. Okay, now we wrap it up with paint protection. You've got your three types: sealant, wax and hybrid. Sealant and waxes are essentially the same thing, but this one's natural. It's usually a Canuba. This one is synthetic, and hybrid is as you assumed, and our hybrid protection is dark matter. As we mentioned before, it is a polish. It does contain abrasives, but it also contains protection, so it is a form of paint protection. And it is either a synthetic base with an emulsified wax in it, or vice versa, depending how you want to see it. I've heard one customer call it a Canuba wax with a synthetic fortifier. I like that. So he gets the look of a Canuba wax, but he gets the durability of a synthetic sealant. That's not necessarily the case. This is a compromise between these two. So it probably shouldn't look as good as a wax. I think it looks better, but that's for other reasons, because the glazes, the color charging in it. It definitely doesn't perform like a sealant. You don't get the longevity, you don't get the contact angle of a sealant. This is something that you would use for show cars or cars that get very, very little use. Definitely we've got it on cars that we use and are driven in the rain, etc., but those cars may see a few thousand kilometers a year. That's the type of paint protection that's suitable for them. Wax, I find no use for wax anymore. It's just an old technology that that I just don't like anymore. We had the most expensive waxes, $18,000 a tub. I won't mention the brand. They were great back then. We still held on to them for a while. I was still using them for a while after synthetics had taken over, because I guess it's like an internal combustion engine thing. An electric car is the future. It is better that there's some emotion attached to a wax. And I still have some emotive attachment to waxes, but I just simply wouldn't put it on a car that required the best paint protection. You'd go for a synthetic. This wins in every single category. It performs better, it outlasts it, higher contact angles, a better washing, more scratch resistance, the whole lot. And it's usually cheaper per, say, month of protection, if you want to have a look at it that way, than a wax. They may cost more than a wax, but they're cheaper long term. This is our full metal jacket paint protection, or full metal jacket spray wax, or coming one day is full metal jacket armor coat. Thank you. I'm going to let you go and digest all of this, maybe go back to the start and go through it again. I hope if you're a professional detailer it's helped, if you're an enthusiast it's helped, and if you're not either and you don't do polishing, I hope it was just entertaining. Thank you very, very much, guys. Good night.